Aloha everyone, welcome. I'm Abaya, and today we'll be focusing on igniting our core, specifically in plank pose, for better posture. And so let's actually take a moment to explore this. We'll start kneeling. Feel free to grab any props, sometimes a block underneath the pelvis feels good here, and take a moment to play with the pelvis tipping forward and notice the sway back that happens. You might feel a little compression in the low back. This is a really common postural habit for people. The opposite of the sway back is the pelvis tucking under, right? And so this happens a lot when you're sitting on a couch or on your phone for a while and you start to lose that support, another very common pattern. And so if you play between those two shapes, you'll notice that the relationship between your pelvis and your rib cage is changing. And today, when we work up to plank pose, we'll be finding this really nice parallel between the pelvis and the rib cage. And the way that we'll do it is we'll first we'll have a lot of stabilization in the shoulders, and then we'll pretend like we're doing a little bit of a crunch so that you feel the connection between the front of the pelvis, the front of the rib cage. And then here's where it gets a little tricky. We'll keep that crunch action and we'll extend up through the space between the shoulder blades, the thoracic vertebra. A lot of people will try to just extend at a single point. It should feel really hard, like there's a tug of war between the vertebra, between the shoulders and the navel center. And that's how you'll know you're doing it right. It should help you feel really strong. Your glutes might even start to engage. Your head will pull into alignment. And so I wanted to do this before we do our plank later on, so you can see the benefits of coming into that properly assembled plank, but also so you could get some preparation, because it's harder when you're supporting yourself on your arms. So now we can forget about all of that and come to lying down. So turn to your right, extend your legs out, scoot into the center of your mat and recline. And it might be handy to have a block nearby in a moment, but you don't need one necessarily. Let's stretch out the legs. It feels really good after having that compression in the knees and the hips. You can reach the arms overhead if that feels inviting. And then let everything soften. So make sure there's no tightness in the shoulders, the neck, the arms, the jaw, the hips. And then just take a few conscious breaths through the nose and try to feel how the rib cage is expanding three-dimensionally. So not just through the belly and the chest, but the side body and the back body as well. And maybe from that little kneeling exploration, you're already feeling awareness of the rib cage, of the pelvis, noticing how the two interact. And we'll start with the core exercise that we always do, because it's the best one. When I find a better one, then we'll do that one. Bend the knees, soles of feet to earth, bring the fingertips to the hip points, and just like we did kneeling, play with rocking the pelvis forward, so that's that big sway back, and then rocking the pelvis back, and that's kind of our slouch. And just again, notice how the relationship between pelvis and rib cage changes, and then let the pelvic tilts get smaller and smaller, and notice how that takes more control. It's more challenging. It takes more strength. And start to find that middle ground where the pelvis becomes neutral and there's a brightening in the core. For me, I feel a tightening underneath my fingertips in that soft tissue space inside of the hip bones. And then stay there. Take a couple of breaths and notice how breathing into that neutral pelvis ignites the core even more. You might feel it in the back of the diaphragm at the bottom of the rib cage. Maybe you can lengthen up through the neck a little bit. And then take a couple of exhales to feel the belly flatten underneath the fingertips. And then just natural inhale. And I use this as an indication. Take a few more on your own. Sometimes I can't tell if my belly is in the right spot when my core is engaging. And so feel free to take a shush breath at any time. You can do it in plank later on. Anytime you want to make sure the transversus abdominis is engaging in this really gentle way, right? It shouldn't be forceful. And then after the next one, we'll start to add a little bit of load by hovering one shin parallel to the earth and then placing it back down and swapping. And usually one leg at a time is pretty easy for people to maintain this neutral pelvis. So just notice how the leg can move, the pelvis doesn't rock, the core stays bright. And if that does feel easy, the next time one shin lifts, lift the other one to meet it. And that one is actually surprisingly hard for a lot of people. So if it feels like you can't maintain neutral, then go back to the one at a time. Otherwise, you can keep pulsing, so lower one, then the other, and then lift one, and then the other. And we do this a lot, so if you are starting to feel really comfortable with lifting both legs, the next time both legs are out, lower the left heel down and slowly start to glide the left heel forward. And the further the foot is from the pelvis, the more that leg is going to try to rock the pelvis forward, and the stronger your core has to be. And then if that went well, you can swap sides. And here it's really easy to lose that corset, so take a little test, because there's muscles that can overcompensate here, right? We can all lengthen the leg out. I know that you can do that. But the question is, can you do it with the deep core and not these superficial muscles that are going to expand the belly, like rectus abdominis or even the diaphragm? So make sure you're breathing. And then bring the soles of the feet underneath the hips. Reach the hands towards the heels. We're going to take a couple of bridge poses. So anchor the big toes. Let the knees drift wide towards the toe next to the pinky and start to unweight the pelvis, lifting away from the mat and lowering it down. You'll take a few on your own. Something I've really been enjoying is having a block between the thighs. You can have it at the smallest height, the middle height, or even the biggest height. Just make sure the SI joint feels okay with the width of the block. I like the biggest height because it helps me anchor my big toes and get my glutes firing a little bit more. But I've been doing this a lot. I'm going to turn to the side just so you can see that biggest height there, and there shouldn't be any pressure in the low back when you do this. And see if you can sync the lift up with the exhale and just feel like the gentlest squeeze that is required to hold the block, and then how that travels up into the pelvic floor. Maybe you can feel that firing with your glutes evenly on left and right sides. And the next time you lift, if it feels good, you're welcome to pause there. Take a couple of breaths and shift the weight from one shoulder blade to the other, just starting to massage the back of the rib cage. When we get into our planks and we have to extend through the thoracic vertebra, it's actually hard for a lot of people to get movement from the space between the shoulders. So right now, take the time to, this isn't just waking up sensation, it's also waking up strength in the shoulders and the upper back. It might be turning muscles on that you're not used to using, and that will come in handy later. And then eventually set the hips down, move the block out of the way. We're going to be rolling from side to side, so make sure it's lower down than the knees. And then hug the knees into the chest, curl up, and feel that shortening between the rib cage and the pelvis that we were exploring from kneeling. And then keep that tight as you start to extend through the thoracic, and that just means bringing the spine back to neutral. And notice how with the condensing of the core, it takes extra work between the shoulders to release back down. And then you can release completely and roll on to the left side. Let the left arm come overhead. And let's just take a couple of rocks on the left side, just letting the left side open, letting that shoulder soften. And then push into the front hand and slowly come up, stagger the legs, and take a nice side bend, letting the whole left side of the body open. And we're going to be coming to this position several times. So I want you to just take a moment here to make sure that the knees feel supported, the hips feel spacious, and that you can feel how the left hip connects to the left rib cage, right? Instead of just flaring the rib cage up. And then paw the hands down, feed the left arm through, and roll over to the other side. Take a moment to rock on the right side. I know you're away from me now. That's okay. You can take a couple of deep breaths, then sigh out of the mouth on the exhale if that feels good. And then push into the front hand. Slowly come up, stagger the legs, take your side bend so the right side of the body's lengthening, and just pause here for a couple of breaths. Push the legs down into the earth so you feel the spine lengthen evenly. Breathe through the spine, and don't just notice the right side open, but notice what the left side of the body is doing as well. And now we'll paw the hands down so we can roll all the way to the other side and up into that side bend. So putting it all together, and you'll go from side bend, pawing down, feeding through, and rolling over to the other side. And try to move as slowly as you need to for this to feel fluid, for it to feel connected. Slower is stronger, but you might notice as you repeat the motion and the side body and the core warms up that it might feel easier to get a little more space in that side bend. The next time you're facing me in the side bend, pause. Give yourself a hug. Take note of what arm is on top because we'll switch this eventually. And then massage your arms a little bit with your hands. You can massage your shoulders. You can massage your lats, anywhere that it feels good to give a little squeeze. And then this next part is super awkward but really fun. We're going to do the same thing but hands free. And I notice on this side it actually feels scary for me to get all the way down. So if you need to, release one hand for a little bit of support and then roll over and try to get up without the use of your arms. And then on the second side, I actually can do it a lot easier, so you might notice that too. If it doesn't feel good, go back to the original way, but I do like the extra core challenge. What really helps me here is to use both legs together and to really feel how the legs integrate via the core and the pelvic floor. And then let's actually meet facing me again and switch arms, so the opposite arms on top. And two options here. You can either take a couple more rolls, or you can stay low and just roll from side to side with this nice hug because it massages your hands and your shoulders and your arms. That's what I'm gonna do. And I think it's like nearly impossible to go from the floor hands free, rolling to one side, and oh no, it's possible. If you want an extra super challenge, you can try it, but it's okay to use your hands. Please don't hurt yourself. And we'll come up however it works for you. And let's just revisit that kneeling position from the beginning, just the rocking of the pelvis forward and back, and just noticing that neutral space if it's feeling a little more familiar. Do that little crunch in the front of the body. Keep that crunch, and then start to pull from the space between the shoulders and the upper shoulders, and see if you can feel where the upper shoulders connect into the deep core. Maybe you can get a little more space at the base of the skull when you do that. And then see if you can keep it as you float up to a high kneel. And here I notice if I'm really engaging here and here, my glutes naturally brighten. So you might feel that little extra strength in the back of the hips. Bring your hands to the front of the hips. We want to avoid any creasing here, so the hands are going to just help us feel that. And start to bend the knees so that you rock back, keeping all that strength we just cultivated. You might notice it dial up a little bit as the knees bend. And usually I don't go very far back here, but I am noticing with the extra strength that we've been tapping into, I personally am feeling that craving of like, ooh, I want a little more knee bend. So if you've done this one a lot with me and you're feeling that itch, it's okay to follow it if the craving's coming from the inside and not from the mind. And the next time you float up, let's grab our block. Place the left foot forward. Place the block, whatever height you want. I've got mine on medium, inside of the left foot. And then just make some nice, easy circles with the hips, just from all of that strengthening work. I want to make sure we're not building tension. And so imagine you're hula hooping in slow motion here. You can feel the side of the hip, the front of the hip, the back of the hip. Make sure to anchor that front big toe. That's going to help the feet enliven and the glutes engage holistically. You don't even have to think about it. Change directions of your circle. Notice if the other direction feels more challenging or less smooth. And then start to notice the relationship between your pelvis and your rib cage here, right? See if you can keep that neutral positioning of pelvis and rib cage. And when I do that, bing, it goes like straight into my psoas in a good way, because I'm not overcompensating with other muscles like extending from the low back, for example, instead of the hip. And then let's roll up, take the block with you, press down into the back knee and the front foot, and just let the side bodies lengthen. If you want to take a little sway from side to side, you can. If you want to circle the weight around the back knee a little bit just to wake more up in that back leg, you can. And then let's switch sides. And now you know the pathway, so you can add on, you can subtract, you can ignore me. We'll start with the hula hoops. As you do the hula hoops, try to feel how the two legs can work together, where the movement is coming from the pelvis and the legs just follow and go the opposite direction. Remember to anchor that front big toe and also suction through the outer edge of that foot, and you might notice a little more strength and support coming up that leg. And then center the weight in the pelvis and roll up just for a moment, and then you have a moment to explore either your side bends, some circling, whatever is interesting, especially in that back leg, right? And yeah, notice the relationship between your pelvis and your rib cage here as well. And then bring the leg in, move the block off to the side. In our planks, we're going to keep our knees down. So if you want to have a blanket underneath your knees, you're welcome to do that. And then we're actually going to meet in Sphinx pose. So the pelvis comes down, elbows underneath the shoulders, and then let yourself get really, so James, you can prop yourself up onto your elbows. Oh, You can let yourself get a little sloppy for a moment and sink the rib cage down, and notice how the shoulder blades kind of squeeze together and there's almost this like drooping through the upper body. And then reverse that by pushing down into the elbows and letting the rib cage puff up and expand so the shoulders slide wide. Take a few pulses like that. And then as you do this, bring some awareness to the neck. Sometimes when I don't think about my neck, it does crazy things, but just being aware helps it follow the curvature of the spine. The next time the rib cage puffs up, stay there. Each time we come into our plank, I'm going to cue this action, the puffing up of the ribs. So breathe into the back of the ribs, try to feel that spaciousness. The next cue is something we've been working with. It's that crunch of bringing the rib cage and the pelvis closer together. So start to crunch through the front of the body. And then you might need to bring your elbows back a little bit. The hips are going to be flexed. So the hips, shoulders, and head are in one straight line, but then the knees are down. So from this crunch position, start to drag the elbows back and play with extending through the thoracic vertebra. So that extension that we've been working for. Pay attention to your neck and then take a shh breath and feel that condensing at the core. And then you'll have the option to hold longer later, but let's all take a breath or a break. You can take a breath too. Release the body down, reach the left arm out to a Y, and then push into the right hand to slowly roll open into a pec stretch. The head can relax down, or it can stay lifted if that feels better in your neck. Push down into the left hand so that you feel the muscles in the left arm engage and you don't feel too much pressure in the shoulder. And then switch sides. And if you don't like holding this stretch, feel free to do a couple on each side. Just rolling from side to side feels really nice. Or you can stay and hold. Okay, let's play with another plank. So elbows underneath shoulders in your Sphinx pose. Start with puffing the rib cage up and then start to crunch through the front of the body. Extend through the upper spine. Pay attention to the neck. And then start to rock the pelvis back just a little bit. And notice how the hips lift when you do that and you get a nice straight line. Nice. Everybody looks really good here. Come out at any time. Make sure you can breathe. Play with those shushing breaths so you can really get that condensing at your center as you do this. And just notice the relationship between rib cage and pelvis. And then release the body down. This time, two options. You can go into those pec stretches, perfect counter pose. I think it feels really good to go beyond the pec stretch and roll onto my back and revisit that bridge pose from earlier in class. So if your space allows and you're craving that, feel free to do that. And if your space allows, you can even get a little wild and roll to the other side and do another bridge. But I know that requires a lot of space, so maybe it's a combination of some pec stretch and some rolling. And then let's meet in a bridge pose. I want to add on just a little bit. So release the hips down so you're in the bridge setup. Bring the left knee in towards the chest. And we're going to do a single leg bridge. And so it's the exact same, but you only have one leg to support you, so it's twice as hard. Start to push down into the right leg, extending through the right hip. And then drape the spine down one vertebra at a time. Let's stay on that first leg. Take a couple, and if it feels really easy, you can dial it up by extending the left leg forward so the two thigh bones are aligned with one another. And that's going to challenge the glutes even more. And you can switch to the other side at any time, but if it feels good and it feels a little challenging, it means this is probably a great thing for your body. And then now I'm switching. If you switched earlier than me, feel free to come into a counter pose at any time that the body is craving it. Take a couple more of those rolls or a pec stretch, or keep dialing it up on the glutes. And when you feel balanced on both sides, you can release for a moment. Just take a mini shavasana. We've done a lot of good work repatterning a lot of core musculature and opening up through the chest. And try breathing through the nose and just absorbing the experience with the breath. And then let's roll onto the belly. And press into the hands to send the hips back to the heels. Move any blankets out of the way. And then tuck your toes under, walk the hands in, hover the knees, and curl up into a little seed. Breathe into the space between the shoulders. Breathe into the low back. If it's fun, you can play with balancing here, bringing hands to heart center and noticing little wobbles in the foot and ankle. And then start to let the heels get heavy, hips get light, forward fold. Keep a deep bend in the knees and sway a little bit. And then bring the hands to the thighs. Press the feet down, press the hands down, and start to send the hips forward to roll up one vertebra at a time. And when you get to the top, notice relationship of pelvis, rib cage. Notice any natural glute engagement that's happening from the work you've done. And see if you can start to activate that little tiny crunch through the front, and then the extension through the upper spine. Should be a natural chin tuck here. And then this probably feels really tight and rigid, and that's not the goal, right? So start to wiggle, shake your tail feathers a little bit. See if you can get loose with it without losing the connectivity, right? So you might not feel as strong, as integrated, but it's still there, yet it's flexible, it's movable. And then just take a little walk around your space. And again, notice the relationship of rib cage and pelvis, and notice how much hip extension you're getting here. Maybe it feels limited because you're not letting your pelvis rock forward, or maybe it feels really spacious because your glutes are so strong and they're really helping you with your step. Make your way back to your mat and grab your blanket. Roll it up. And it should be probably about like 3 inches high when you roll it up. Any kind of blanket is fine, but if it's a thinner blanket, you might need to fold it extra. And then you're going to bring the heels onto the blanket so the balls of the feet are in front of the blanket. Bring your hands to your hips and start to circle the weight around the heels, and just notice the support in the foot, on the outer ankle, the back of the heel, the inner ankle, and circle the other way. And then let your circles get smaller and smaller until you're balanced. This is in homage to Barbie. We all have our little Barbie feet right now. Spread your toes out and make sure the arches of the feet aren't dropping in. So you might need to anchor the big toe and spiral the thighs open for a moment. And then exhale to hover the hands to the horizon. And inhale to relax back down. And do this a couple of times. And again, notice the brightening of the core. Notice the relationship of pelvis to rib cage. Notice any brightening that happens naturally in the glutes, not because you're squeezing, because they're just naturally supporting you. And the next time the hands start to sweep, add in some hip flexion for a chair pose. Reach the hips back, reach the arms forward, and notice how this wants to take you out of that neutral positioning of pelvis and rib cage. Try to do that little crunch that we've been playing with and then extend through the upper spine just to find neutral. And see if you can feel the same strength of plank here in your chair pose. And then sweep the arms back so they're in line with the side bodies, and notice how the back body ignites. Maybe you can create a little more strength or length or both through the spine. And then shift the weight into the right foot and start to hover the left knee into heron pose. Extend the right leg. Pause for a moment. It's okay to be wobbly in that right leg as long as the arch isn't collapsing. And then bend the right knee, bounce a couple of times, and start to kick the left foot back into Virabhadrasana 3 with your Barbie foot. I know it's extra hard. We're almost done. Place the left foot down and slowly start to shift the weight back into the left foot, and it should feel like because you've got the whole foot down on the ground. And now cross the right leg over the left, bend the left knee, and give yourself a hug with the left arm on top for a modified eagle pose. Gently let the legs squeeze together, but only to lengthen the spine and find that nice neutral. If you want to play with some curls here, you can crunch forward and then squeeze the legs together to undulate back up, kind of like a snake. Just make sure you're not gripping in the inner thighs. Too much squeezing here can create imbalance, so it really is less is more. Almost like, think of the squeeze like a heartbeat. And the next time you roll up, take a big step so the right foot comes in front of the blanket. We'll just take one moment in Virabhadrasana 1 with both feet on the floor. Press evenly into both feet. And again, pay attention to pelvis and rib cage. And then slowly bend into the front knee as you extend through the upper spine. And this time, the upper spine extension isn't just taking you into neutral. You can actually come into the back bend, and you might notice that nice glute engagement and hip opening that naturally happens when everything is so integrated here. And then step forward, bring both heels back onto the blanket and pause between sides. Take a couple of breaths. And we'll start with just some arm lifts to the horizon. Match this with your exhale. Take one or two more. And then the next time you go to lift the arms, start to reach the hips back. And notice if you want to sit a little further back. You don't have to, but you might feel that support of the back line. You might find that craving. Make sure you don't feel pressure in your knees here. Shift the weight over into the left heel, power down into the left leg to hover the right knee for heron on the second side. And again, it's going to be extra wobbly. See if you can spread the toes, press through the inside and outside of the ball of the foot as well as the heel. And then slowly start to kick that leg back for our high heel Virabhadrasana 3. Bend the front knee a little extra. That's going to help you get more weight into that heel. Lengthen the heel back and the crown of the head forward. See if you can find your plank support here as well. And then slowly lower the back foot down. Shift the weight into the back foot. Cross the left leg over this time. So right arm's on top. Give yourself a big hug. Let the breath flow in naturally. If you want to add those curl ups, you can. Try to be nice and easy here. I feel like there's a tendency in eagle to squeeze and grip and overdo it. Let it feel as buoyant and light as possible. Just like water flowing through a stream bed. And the next time you roll up, big step forward with the left foot. Float the arms. Nice, spacious Virabhadrasana 1. And as you find the relationship between the pelvis and the rib cage, start to challenge it by bending the front knee and extending through the thoracic vertebra. Right? We really want most of the opening to come through the upper spine, but you'll feel it in the back psoas, the back leg and ankle. And then you can step forward into the Tadasana for just a moment. And with the heels down on the earth, we'll take one last chair pose. Just notice if it feels different. Maybe again there's that craving to go lower. You can use your blanket as a little seat if you really want to. And then wherever you are, release the body forward into a forward fold. Move the blanket off to the side. Step back into a full plank, but just for a moment. Drop the knees. And two options here. You can either take a rest in Bhaktasana, or if you want one more round of plank, you can lower into your Sphinx pose and go through your checkpoints. If you're in Bhaktasana, feel free to take any pose or counter pose the body's craving. Here's our checkpoints: shoulders over elbows. Puff up through the rib cage. Take your crunch through the front of the body and then start to extend through the thoracic. And then the final moment is starting to rock the pelvis back. And as you do that, the pelvis is going to lift. Front of the body is going to shorten. In this last round, if you want a little bit more, you can play with hovering one leg at a time. But just make sure it doesn't go into the hip flexors of the grounded knee. You really want it to feel balanced between hip flexors and glutes. I find if I tuck my toes under and traction my toes back, I can get a little bit more support through the glutes of the grounded leg. And then let's release the body down. Wherever you are, we'll meet in Makarasana. Hands stack, elbows wide, forehead to hands. And just breathe. Notice if the breath fills the body more effortlessly through front, back, and sides. And imagine the breath decompressing any points of tension in the body. And extend the left arm. Push into the right arm to roll onto the back. This was so fun before. I want to do it again. Taking a moment in your bridge pose. And then a couple of options here. You can go for the rolling from bridge pose side to side, or in your bridge pose, you can massage the back by swaying from side to side and slowly lowering down one vertebra at a time as you sway, and then just smearing the pelvis from left to right. Just getting the most superficial fascia on the back body to glide, releasing any adhesions. And take your time with this. This is something that I could really play with for many minutes because it feels really good in my body. So if you're enjoying this little back massage or the rolling bridge pose, keep going with it. And then eventually you can make your way onto your mat and grab your blanket, place it underneath the backs of the knees, and prepare for Shavasana. And if there's anything else that your body is craving, be my guest, please. It is my goal for you to hear your body's cravings and to listen to them. So do that for as long as you want. Drinking water can be good. And then we did a lot of really nice strengthening work. That plank pose has been healing my body, so I'm enjoying incorporating it into our yoga classes. But after doing that strengthening work, it's so important to give our body the time to absorb the new patterning and to also rebalance and release any tension, because sometimes we overdo it. And so as you come into stillness, feel that potential of absorbing new information, not with the mind, but with this deeper awareness, this deeper intelligence. And we'll rest here for the next several minutes. And if you notice that anything needs a little extra support or feels tight, give yourself the opportunity to wiggle around and adjust. And then sink into the stillness and see how revitalizing staying conscious through stillness can be. Start to focus on the breath and let it flow down to the fingers and the toes. And try being aware of your whole self, as if you're watching your physical body from outside of your body. And from this observer perspective, you can start to make gentle movements. Anything that helps re-energize the body. And take your time and enjoy having a body. And eventually visualize yourself in a perfect meditation seat, supported inside and out, bright and radiant. And let that visualization help pull you up to that very seat. And again, you can take your time and enjoy the ride. Take the scenic route. And we'll eventually meet in our meditation seat. And when you do arrive there, notice your pelvis and your rib cage, and notice if it's easier than usual to have a tall supported posture. And then let your awareness start to sink down into the heart, and know that your body is taken care of. You don't have to have any energy left in the physical body. Can all sink into the heart space. And let each breath help you interact with that heart space. Help you expand it, help you release further into it. And we can add the mantra Om Namah Shivaya with each in-breath and out-breath at the heart. Notice with the spine perfectly aligned and your focus down in your energy body, if it's effortless to allow energy to start to flow through the energetic spine. You don't have to do anything, but for this last minute, just let yourself observe and relax and release into that energetic flow. Thank you so much for practicing. Namaste. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, and may your supportive posture stay with you the rest of the week as well.